Today, I'm going to show you an easy way to practice your watercolor brush strokes with just 2 brushes and a couple of paint colors. I have a beautiful sample here today. It's a kupukupu fern. It is a native Hawaiian fern. Probably looks a lot like some other ferns, but there's some subtle differences. But this thing grows like crazy, and so I've been splitting it off in my garden, just making more and more new clumps and just filling in some spaces. So I enjoy this guy. It's really easy to grow and use as a filler for making lei. And you know what? I thought, let's do it. So here's my sample, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to make this in just 4 steps. The first thing we're going to do, get my fresh paper here. So I'm going to draw the stem. Really easy. You can do this. Go really lightly. I'm going to go directly on my watercolor paper, and I am just going to make a line. You can make it curve whichever way you want. You can make it crisscross, make other ones in there. You do whatever you like there, whatever your comfort level is with watercolor. Okay, I know it's really light on the video. I'm trying to be gentle on my watercolor paper, so I don't want to go really hard, but I am going to make a sort of triangular shape from the top downward, and it does not have to be perfect. Look how uneven some of these tips of the fern are, and how different some of them are from each other. Okay, so it really doesn't matter if yours looks like mine. This one's a little bit deformed even, right? Okay, I'm going to make a little crisscross across the bottom. Now these are actually quite long ferns, but I just need a place to end, so I'm just going to act like I've just snipped it off like I have here. Might have gotten a little close to the edge there, but that's okay. All right, so now you really only need 2 brushes. I think I'm gonna make my brush a little bit bigger than the one I had, which I used in my sample. So I have a number 6 Raphael Imitation Kolinsky brush, and I have a number 1 round Princeton Velvet Touch. I like this Princeton Velvet Touch line as well as their Heritage line. I recommend starting with something like a 6 or an 8 if you're just testing things out and getting started. But that is the 2 that I'm using. We are going to mix our paint, okay? So there's a ton of premixed paints out here. They are mostly convenience when it comes to the greens, okay? I don't necessarily love this one that I have here, but if you have one you like, go ahead and use it. I'm going to make my own mix with Phthalo green yellow shade. I have a little bit here already on my palette. I'm going to pull that green over. Get a few blobs of paint going on over here. Okay, and then I'm also going to grab one that is called Permanent Yellow. Oopsies, both of these are by Daniel Smith. I'm going to use another brush because my brush I just did with that green is really loaded with paint. And there's no sense in wasting it and getting my water all dirty. Well, I contaminated my yellow, didn't I? Look at that. So I'm going to pull this over here to where I have my green already in place, and I'm going to mix it, see if I like it. And if so, I can go ahead and get started with painting. Kind of got a little paint booger here. Hold on. There we go. We'll move him over to the side. Let him get saturated. All right. Oop, still a little bit green there. Okay. So you may find yourself with a big load of water on your brush, in which case you want to have a paper towel handy. And I like to roll the top of my brush a little bit to get some of that extra stuff out. And now we're going to apply this paint. We are going to start at the bottom and work our way up, and then we'll repeat the process on the other side. That very first brush stroke that we place down is going to be darker and more saturated than all your other brush strokes. So it's basically going to have a heavy pigment load in your brush for that very first one. I'm just kind of adjusting some of my colors over here. I added a little more yellow and a little bit of a darker blue called Indian Throne Blue. Okay. Ooh, yeah, I like that one a little bit better. Okay, so I'm making these triangular shapes, and I'm using this guideline to tell me approximately where the tip of my fern is going to go. I think I'm going to go over this first one a little bit so it looks more similar. Okay, so I make one stroke, I overlap a little bit and come back down and do the other one. It is leaving a little bit of white there. If you like that, that's cool. We just leave it. You can pretend it is the little central vein. It's a little bit smaller than what I've got here, but that's okay. We're just practicing. And maybe you want to wiggle your fern leaves one direction or another, make some imperfections. Okay, I'm starting to see I might have to reload my brush soon because I've got some white area, little white speckles that are starting to show up. For example, there we go. See all those little white speckles? That is a sign to me that I need to reload my brush. Okay. Now, as you work with your watercolor, you may notice that it's starting to dry on you. You might have to wet it down with another drop of water or two, a spray bottle, a dropper bottle, a pipette, whatever you find easy. I do like dropper bottles though, because you can fill them up once and they will last you a whole paint session, and it'll give you a nice clear drop of water instead of taking your brush and going into your big container of water and then dropping it onto your palette. It can sometimes get contaminated colors, especially if you're working with yellow or light pastel glazes with lots of water already added to them. Anything that's in your water cup will end up showing up on your paint palette mix with very light colors. Okay, so I'm getting smaller and smaller. I'm still somewhat following that guideline that I first drew. We will erase that guideline at the very end, so no worries about that. Okay, every now and then I'm giving a little bit more space. I noticed with these ferns there's a little bit of overlap on the bottom area as you get wider and wider, and then as you get towards the top they look a little bit more spaced out on some of these samples. So I'm also trying to make skinnier ferns here too, so they're a little bit more spaced, and these individual leaves are also skinnier, so I have to control my brush a little bit more and be a little bit more careful. Okay, now instead of using the side of my brush so much, I'm starting to angle my hand up a little bit more. Okay, so I went from touching a lot of the brush to the paper, and now I'm lifting it and I'm getting just a small portion towards the bottom of the brush to get these tiny skinny areas. You can also switch to a smaller brush if that's more comfortable for you, but I'm a little lazy when it comes to switching brushes, so I'm going to try as much as I can to just use that one. All right, so I did a little leaf at the very tip, and now I'm going to rotate my paper and work my way back down or back up the paper, whichever. Since my brush is loaded a little bit, I'm going to actually start on this end. I still have some paint on there, and this is an area I don't necessarily want to be super saturated, so it's perfect that I have a little bit of paint already loaded into my brush. Those are starting to look a little bit too similar, so I'm going to go back and add a little wiggle to the tips. There we go. Okay, now it's time to reload my brush. Okay, so now I'm going to work from the bottom to the top. There's another variation you can try with this project. Instead of just doing a solid green, you can also add a little bit more blue while it's wet. I'll show you what that looks like. A little bit too much blue. So this area right here, if I were to pick it up, you could see a little bit of a satin sheen right there, okay? So that's a really good time to do fun stuff with watercolor, like adding slightly different colors. So I've added a little bit more blue to my brush, and in some of these ferns, I can lay that blue down and it'll make a little bit of interesting variation. Now, I'm not going to touch this one because I can see that this guy over here is already matte in appearance. So it's on its way to being dry, and it's going to get kind of funky if I try to add anything to this one. So I'm going to leave this first one alone. So if you do this method, you can try having one brush with blue in your non-dominant hand and your main green color in your dominant hand, and then you switch back and forth with the blue and the green, so you don't have to constantly be washing your brushes. You can also try doing just a few strokes at a time and then coming back in and dropping in some of that blue bent with your other brush. So that'll go a little faster than just doing one leaf at a time this way. You do 2, 3, depends on how dry your climate is. Oh, my wiggles all started looking the same, so I'm going to try to vary it up a little bit. Add a little bit of my darker blue dropped in. Now, one thing you also want to do is make sure that this blue that you're adding is a little bit thicker in terms of the mixture, the viscosity of it, so that it spreads out nicely. If you were to add a really watery dark blue into that area, and it was more watery than this green, what it would do is create these funky little things that people call cabbage leaves. Some people like them, but some people don't. But I would recommend experimenting with that a little bit more, and of course I'll have some videos on that as well. But watercolor is really all about the ratio of pigment to water that's on your palette and in your brush, and you can control that in various ways, but I really recommend just experimenting and practicing as much as you can, just like you would a sport or a musical instrument, to see what kind of interesting things you can do with watercolor when it comes to those variations with pigment. I mean, practice, 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 and don't just sit there mindlessly doing it, but also pay attention to what those ratios are doing. When you actually pay attention to what's going on with the watercolor, then you will finally start understanding it. So you could also add a little bit of yellow to your leaves too if you wanted to do that, or both. Do a little bit of yellow on some parts and a little bit of that darker blue on some others. So if you do get a section that dries before you are able to add your blue dropped in, you can always come back to it and do some things like wetting it down with clear water. So I'll show you on a few of these. Just clear water, right? These are already dry, so they feel like room temperature to the back of my hand. And now I'm going to add that darker blue onto that clear water area. And that clear water has already absorbed into the paper, and it's going to help this blue spread out a little bit more evenly. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these. You can see these ferns have a reddish brown stem. They're quite pretty, and so that's what I did on the sample, and I'm going to show you how I did that. Well, you could use a pre-mixed brown like this one here, but you could also mix a little bit of red with the green that you've been using, and this will give your fern a bit of what we call color harmony. Now what I'm looking for over here is I want to be able to move my brush through my little paint puddle and not have it too watery where it's just flowing around really quickly. I'm looking for a nice consistency, kind of like a creamy mixture. Like if you were to imagine cream, looking for cream more than I am skim milk. So because I've got a heavy load of paint in my little brush, I am going to start at the stem so it'll end up being a little bit more pigmented. And I also flipped my paper because it's easier to move your wrist towards yourself with a paintbrush than it is to bend your wrist in a funky way and move your paintbrush away from you. Okay, so you notice I do a lot of flipping in these videos. That's why I'm trying to be more ergonomic with my wrist. All right. Holding my paintbrush at a 45-degree angle or so. I'm not going to worry too much about the bottom area. And I'm not going to worry about if this is a straight line or not. Nature has all kinds of imperfections. And when we let those imperfections show in our work, sometimes our stuff looks a little bit more realistic. I'm also letting some of those times when my paintbrush skips over the paper and shows little white speckles, I'm letting those just exist because it adds a little bit of life at this point. I want to have some of those fun speckles. My little paint puddle is starting to dry out, so I just put a little drop of water in there. Okay, I'm getting closer to the end. So I want to be more careful. You notice I'm stabilizing my whole hand with my pinky. The rest of my hand is lifted off the paper. That's just the habit I've gotten into, but you could also place your whole wrist on your surface if you don't have any wet paint, but I've gotten into the habit of doing this just because sometimes I've ran my hand into something that was wet, so my pinky is a lot smaller point of contact than my side of my hand. Okay, it's getting lighter and lighter towards the end here too. Going in with a lighter touch, and there we go. Okay, we are almost done. Finishing touches on this, I would say once this is dry, you can come back in with a kneaded eraser and you can dab those original triangular guidelines that you made. But just definitely wait until it's dry because it will smear your paint if you don't. So maybe give it, 10 minutes or so, depending on your climate, and feel it at the back of your hand. If it feels cool to the touch, it's still wet. If it feels like room temperature, you are good to go with that eraser. All right. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. Bye.